Okay, so here is the news from the UK. We've talked a lot on this show about the possibility of various companies leaving the UK or leaving at least the UK stock exchange and the London Stock Exchange, sorry, in the UK stock market. And we've occasionally speculated with the likes of Wise of, well, rightly, what would this company be worth if it traded in the US? And we're going to find out soon enough in their case. But the latest company to threaten or suggest or be speculated or consider leaving the UK is Astrazeneca. This was news from earlier this week, reported in the Times. And Pascal Soriot, who is their CEO, is said to be considering moving their listing to the US. Nothing particularly major yet, and certainly nothing officially announced by any means. This is still very much in the rumor and speculation stage. But it's catching attention for the very obvious reason that this is one of, if not the biggest stocks in the FTSE 100. This would be a fairly significant blow to the credibility of UK markets. I mean, it's questionable how much they can go down from here, I think, but it would be significant losing AstraZeneca across the Atlantic. And it's also headquartered in not Hull, Cambridge in this case, which means it's not one of these companies where you would say, in the style of Ashtead, it basically belongs over there anyway. All their operations are over there. Their headquarters is over there. It's maybe just a sense of this makes more sense, a kind of case of this makes more sense than a genuine statement about the UK. But definitely not the case with AstraZeneca. This is a big, serious thing, and my sense is that it won't happen. I've got two reasons for thinking this won't happen, Steve. See what you think. The first is valuation. So one big reason we see a lot of companies going from the UK to the US in terms of stock market listing is valuation. It's well known that in general, UK shares trade at discounts to their US counterparts. That's partly our thinking behind Wise. There are deeper pools of capital over there. Exciting tech companies tend to trade at in some cases, really some probably undeservedly high multiples. But hey, look, if you're planning on selling some shares, you should go sell them where people are going to pay more for them, not where they're going to pay less for them. And don't think anyone should really resent you for doing that. That makes sense for a lot of companies, but not as far as I can see AstraZeneca. So the worst performing S&P 500 sector over the last 12 months has been healthcare. And it's worth noting that that's actually got some good things in it that have done quite well. Things like Intuitive Surgical are actually quite strong performers. The kind of industry within the sector that's been faring quite badly is pharma. Things like Pfizer, things like Merck, things like Bristol Myers all trade at what are by their standards, and you do expect some volatility in terms of price earnings ratios here, reasonably low multiples. And they are all kind of unusually low in a PE thing. And they're all lower than AstraZeneca, by the way, as well. So not convinced this is a case of you move across the Atlantic, you get a better valuation. I think it might be worse in AstraZeneca's case, and that's something to certainly think about here. I mean, more generally, I was looking at the JP Morgan guide to the markets for Q3 because we're now in Q3, so that is out. And they have a very nice chart that shows you differences in valuation. They measure this on PE, which we know is not perfect, and various companies can have unusually high or unusually low earnings, and that can skew things a bit. But as a kind of at least neutral between them way of measuring things and shouldn't favour one or the other, they measure PE gaps between sectors in the UK and the US. And of course, companies are not one for one interchangeable, whether they're tech or healthcare or whatever. But in general, UK companies trade at lower multiples than their US counterparts, but the narrowest gap and the one that has been closing the most recently is healthcare. So I'm highly skeptical in that case, and that's including, again, the likes of Intuitive Surgical, which actually trades at pretty big multiples over in the US, and we don't have anything, I think, in the healthcare space that's that high in the UK, though I could be wrong. Anyone point out to me if there is something along those lines. Anyway, in fact, so I don't see valuation as a good reason. In fairness to Soriot, he didn't say that was the reason. What he said was the reason was the UK, he thinks, is not a good operating environment for your AstraZenecas of this world. And there are sort of two things, I think, that he's got issues with and he has voiced before, or at least two. He also dislikes Europe for similar but not entirely the same reasons, and this will become apparent as we go along. So if we start right at the beginning for the moment, but for pharma companies, pricing and selling drugs is complicated for a number of reasons, right? Because everyone understands the following things to be the case. You want people who develop things like COVID vaccines or cancer treatments or whatever to be rewarded for doing that. I run a seminar where I talk about business ethics, and actually a lot of the people in there, despite being fairly left, fairly anti anyone having any money whatsoever, are all kind of okay that if someone's going to have some money, yeah, okay, the person who came up with a COVID vaccine, they get to be rich. Fair enough. On the other hand, you don't want them price gouging. No one wants them price gouging, and you want these things to actually be affordable to people. And the way it works at the moment is you have patents, and patents expire, and so on. And that's we can argue about whether they expire after the right amount of time and the chances of approval and so on and so forth. But that's the broad system that we have right now. Is it perfect? Probably not. Is it okay? Probably yes. The UK has two kind of things that are bugging Surrey up at the moment, and one is quite specific and one is quite general. Here's the specific one. The NHS, of course, is the UK's big healthcare provider, and they buy drugs, but they can't buy every drug. And what they do is take recommendations from something called the National Institute for Healthcare Excellence, which is shortened to NICE. A NICE attempts to work out how cost effective various treatments are. And the way it does this is partly by looking at the severity of the underlying condition. And NICE, for whatever reason, not about to get into the whys and wherefores because I don't know them, have decided that metastatic breast cancer is quote unquote moderately severe rather than severe. Sorry, objects to this because this has consequences for AstraZeneca. The more severe something is, the more the NHS is willing to pay for it, and the more the drug company can charge for it, correlatingly. And HER2, well, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, is AstraZeneca's treatment for metastatic breast cancer. And with it classified as moderately severe, that affects what AstraZeneca can get, and it's not routinely made available on the NHS because it's priced at a level that they won't buy for a moderately severe condition in England anyway. And sorry, it points out that this means it's available in some kind of countries in the UK and not others. And he thinks that, well, look, that is to understate the issue here. That if you ask patients with the condition, they would tell you it's more than moderately severe. Make of that what you will. There is a more general issue, though, and it concerns price controls. So the way things work in the UK is if the NHS overspends because of pricing on branded drugs, i.e. things that are still in patent, not stuff like paracetamol or whatever, pharma companies have to pay a rebate to the UK government. There's an optional one and a kind of mandatory one, so you can, I'm not sure about the difference between the two, but one way or another, they end up paying rebates, and that very much determines what they can charge again. Sorrett thinks this is basically stifling innovation, and he may be correct. However, the idea you're going to move to the US to have a better time of this as a pharma company is beyond me, because I think things are going in exactly the opposite direction in the US at the moment. What you've seen is RFK, who is the current US Secretary of Health, has immediately decided that the US is not paying more than anybody else for drugs. Make of that what you will, but that's a sign prices are coming down. He's also looking to either ban, if he can, or make prohibitively expensive direct-to-consumer advertising, which has been a big source of revenue growth driver for pharma companies. And he's also looking to shift the US's health budget towards preventative things rather than curative things. You can think he's right or wrong or otherwise about this, but this is the reason, back to where I was before, that your Pfizers and your Mercks and your so on and so forth are trading at terrible valuations, because actually it's really tough being a pharma company in the US at the moment. So I thought that AstraZeneca is, because of the operating environment, going to up sticks and move itself over there seems unlikely to me. Bottom line for all of this, Steve, I realise I've been going on a fair bit here, but it's a slightly complicated situation. The UK, my suspicion is Soros is bluffing in this situation, and he probably wants a more favourable and operating environment in the UK in terms of regulation. He might be justified in asking for that. I don't know. He may or may not get it. And I think the UK does have to think about how competitive it is for businesses. This is the broad issue we've talked about a fair bit here, right? In a lot of cases, neither of us blames companies for going and listing in the US rather than the UK. We view that as a reflection on the UK's stock market rather than the companies themselves. And that is something for the UK to consider. The fact that I'm skeptical of AstraZeneca here does not change or take away that issue at all. But I don't see this happening for AstraZeneca. I think it's a bad candidate to move across the Atlantic, and can't blame him for trying, but I'm not convinced. What do you think?
I think it's like a bark without the bite kind of situation. I think Soriot's throwing his toys out the pram because he thinks that regulation over here is a little bit too tight, and he thinks that we basically have a government that's maybe walking wounded at the moment, and believes that he might be able to sort of curry some favour by pretending to threaten to leave. There's a couple of things that was pointed to in the article that I read, that they've spent about £1 billion on their headquarters only a couple of years ago, but they have spent about $3.5 billion in their US headquarters. So that's kind of balanced out by spend somewhat. But his claims, or the things he wants, are not entirely sort of unfounded. So when the COVID vaccine was released, we basically did a kind of price list for it, and it was a one price kind of fits all, but it was kind of adjusted to a country's GDP. And Soriot quite liked that for the COVID vaccine, and he basically wants to do that um, moving forward with all of the drugs. He doesn't think that an external an external body should be able to essentially set the price they will pay for the drug. He thinks that they should be able to set that themselves. I'm not sure that's going to be a winner for him, and I'm also not sure going to the US fixes that for him. The other point, Steve, that you made is, I think, the key one. AstraZeneca regularly trades around the 30 times earnings in the UK, and that's because we have a government that isn't trying to randomly tackle pharma companies in the way that America currently is. I think there's a little bit of a pharma companies might be the enemy of RFK rather than from what I've heard of him talking. And yeah, to say that they're looking for more preventative measures, I assume that'll be like healing stones and all that other kind of stuff. Because the stuff I've heard him talk about is frankly nonsense. So yes, I think we can discount that. Not that it won't have sent shivers through the UK, and at a time when we have the Mansion House speech coming soon, which is the kind of next announcement we get of the government's plans. It's coming at the end of this month, and I'm sure we'll cover that if we have to. I wouldn't be surprised to see some kind of, them trying to sort of placate him a little bit, and see where we go, Steve. But yes, I think he couldn't lie to you and tell you he's going left valuation because he's got it here. And I don't think he can lie to you and tell you it's for easier regulation, because US regulation is probably a little bit quicker than UK, but it's no less rigorous if you look at the kind of costs involved for the pharma companies over there. So yeah, not too impressed with this either, Steve, to be honest with you. And I think it's kind of unfounded. I think it's a little bit of toys out the pram, to be honest.
It is, and there's not much more to kind of add to it beyond that, because I don't think either of us are particularly interested in buying this. I mean, even in terms of an arbitrage opportunity, the stock climbed a couple of percent, which either tells you the market doesn't really believe it, or it tells you that the market doesn't really like it one way or another very much. The idea of them kind of moving across. I don't know enough about AstraZeneca to buy it unless something really weird happens here. I don't think this is weird enough in these cases, and it's one of the areas where I think a lot of people find it acceptable to say this is not in your circle of competence, although that probably means they shouldn't talk for sort of 13 minutes like I did just then about it. So you've been watching a segment from the Playing FTSE show, brought to you in association with our favourite broker, Trading 212. For the full version of the show, check us out on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you open a new account with Trading 212 using the link in the description, there's a free fractional share in it for you. Just make sure that you use the code FTSE when you sign up. Terms and conditions apply, and do remember that when investing, your capital is at risk.